The carnage in Las Vegas has led to an unusual development on Capitol Hill. Republicans signaled they're open to regulating the kind of equipment that enabled the shooter to gun down hundreds. CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes reports.
I didn't even know what these things were like come Monday.
In a sea change for Republicans, lawmakers from the House Speaker on down today said they're open to banning bump stocks.
It's certainly something that should be looked at.
I'd be willing to entertain those.
The affordable devices essentially turn legal semi-automatic rifles
We're going to try a 30-round ammo dump
into machine guns capable of firing hundreds of rounds a minute.
Extremely simple, very easy to control the burst.
Fully automatic weapons have been outlawed for many, many years. This seems to be a way of going around that.
Back in 2010, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms ruled that bump stocks are a firearm part and therefore not regulated as a firearm under the Gun Control Act or National Firearms Act.
Now that it's well known, I'm concerned that now you're going to have a massive proliferation, especially with copycat type people.
Adam Kinzinger of Illinois and two other Republicans sent a letter to the ATF today urging it to reevaluate these devices and vowing to explore legislative options as well.
How many Republicans have said to you, I support what you're trying to do?
A lot.
Enough to pass a bill?
Yeah, I think there's enough to pass a bill.
But the president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, warned of grassroots fallout, telling the news outlet Axios that Mr. Trump going left on gun control is impossible, will be the end of everything. And some Republicans worry that any new restrictions will set a bad precedent.
It's about undermining the Second Amendment.
Democrat Nancy Pelosi doesn't think that argument will win out in the wake of the Vegas carnage.
So what? They're going to say if you give them bump stock, it's going to be a slippery slope? I certainly hope so.
Even the National Rifle Association saw the writing on the wall Thursday. Its leaders breaking their silence on this issue, Elaine, to say that they, too, now believe bump stocks should be regulated.
Well, Nancy, there was a bipartisan bill after the Sandy Hook shooting, but it didn't pass in the Senate. Is this push any different?
What's different about this push is that many Republicans hope and believe that this is something that could be taken care of by the ATF so that they never would have to cast a vote that could be seen by some of their more conservative constituents as going soft on gun rights. They believe that if the ATF simply re-examines its decision from a few years ago that bump stocks don't fall under the rubric of automatic weapons and therefore aren't subject to the same kind of regulation, if they can get them to roll that back, then there's no need to pass legislation here on Capitol Hill. But you do have a number of Republicans already, in fact, several different groups of them who are working on legislation in the event that the ATF doesn't act. And that is new, Elaine, and somewhat disorienting to have Republicans, Democrats, the White House, and the NRA all on the same side on this issue.
Well, some lawmakers have cautioned in the past that if you give gun control advocates an inch, they will take a mile. As we saw in your piece, Nancy Pelosi says she hopes bump stock legislation is a slippery slope. So how will her remarks, do you think, affect the chances of legislation happening?
Well, Republicans, some of them anyway, are already highlighting that comment by Pelosi. You had Steve Scalise, who himself was shot this summer, but who is still a staunch supporter of gun rights from Louisiana, saying, look, there it is. Nancy Pelosi says she wants this to be a slippery slope. We've got to be very careful about taking the legislative route here. We have to see if the ATF will do this itself first. But I will say that there is a growing number of Republicans who see this device as simply so egregious, who say that it is clearly the purpose of these devices to turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons. They say that completely violates what is really an extremely restrictive 30-year ban on almost all automatic weapons. And I do think that there is going to be an incredible amount of pressure on them if the ATF doesn't act to do something because their constituents see that this one man was able to use a stockpile of weapons to mow down 500 or more people in a very short period of time.
Nancy, I want to ask you about a separate story that's bubbling to the surface. Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, said it is time for Nancy Pelosi and her team to go. Are we seeing growing frustration within the Democratic Party?
I think what you see is sporadic outbursts of frustration, which is not all that surprising when you've got a large, diverse, outspoken caucus, some of whom have been around a long time, some of whom haven't, some of whom would like their own opportunity to move up in leadership and are frustrated that you've had the same people in leadership for a long time. What made Linda Sanchez's remarks so surprising and what got so much attention was the fact that often you hear this from newer members, folks who are just coming in who say, look, that's the old guard. We want to do things a new way. We feel that, the fact that Democrats are currently in the minority in the House says something. It's time for fresh blood. You don't often hear it from people like Sanchez, who have been here on Capitol Hill for a long time, who are more senior lawmakers. And that is definitely something that is certain to cause some discomfort within the ranks of leadership on the Democratic side.
Finally, Nancy, Republican Representative Tim Murphy has resigned after reports he asked the woman he was having an affair with to have an abortion, even though he has supported anti-abortion policies. What will his absence mean for the GOP?
Well, to be honest, I think at the end of the day, what forced him to take this action, first to say he was going to retire at the end of his term, and then to do an about-face and say actually he's going to resign right away, was the very damning comments that were reportedly made by his own chief of staff here on Capitol Hill. Her memo was printed by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and she outlined, if true, a lawmaker who appeared to have lost some control over his own behavior in a way that she said was abusive to the staff. She went into great detail about the fact that he frequently berated his staffers, made accusations that weren't true, drove erratically. She said she feared for her life. She pointed out that there had been nearly 100% turnover in the office over the past year because he was so verbally abusive. I think that was what was really damaging to him, much greater than the hypocrisy over abortion. If lawmakers had to step down over hypocrisy, we wouldn't have anyone left up here on Capitol Hill. But it's probably that memo that led the House Speaker Paul Ryan to encourage Murphy that he might want to seek a new line of work.
Yeah, some serious accusations outlined in that. Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill for us. Nancy, thank you.